This call is being recorded.
Hello, and welcome to the Castle of Horror interview segment where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds from Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the Alex Van Helsing series from HarperCollins. Tonight, we talk once again to David Bowles, author of Mexican Bestiary, Creature Feature, and Flower Song Dance. His work on urban legends and folklore has been featured on Monsters and Mysteries in America, a TV show that he has been consulting with. There's more TV news on the horizon. We recently talked to him about Kingdom Beneath the Waves, which was the second book in a series, very popular, youth-oriented series about the shape-shifting Garza twins. And now he is back with two new books, one of which I have been pouring through. The new books are The Ghosts of the Rio Grande Valley, that's a nonfiction book, and Lords of the Earth, which is, I believe, the very first Mexican kaiju novel. Welcome, David. Welcome back.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be back. I appreciate it.
Oh no, I'm so happy. It's always actually really good to talk to you because we go deep on these things.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
okay, all right. The book I want to talk about first is Ghosts of the Rio Grande Valley. This is written by you with illustrations by Jose Melendez, and they are these. Can you describe his style of you describe ghost stories as you go through, and before we describe how the whole thing is organized, can you describe the style of this illustrator?
Sure. I mean, we've worked together on other projects, but for this particular project, he went with, I would say, a little grittier and more grittier, and at the same time more impressionistic
Hmm.
images of things. So to suggest, I don't know, the darkness and sinister nature of things. Less precise than the work he did on Border Lore, with almost kind of like a watercolor wash over inks that are kind of jagged and uneven. And I think what he was going for was something that would suggest that ethereal,
Yes,
mysterious nature of Ghost. And I think he pulled it off pretty well. It's very, very
they
interesting
are.
images.
I remember when I was a kid, I used to read, this, what was it, Stories to Tell in the Dark, I think was the HarperCollins series of short
Yeah.
stories, and also a lot of Twilight Zone magazine short stories. And sometimes they would have an illustrator who was like this. I really like what Melendez does because, you'll have a description of a family of slaves, and the image that he draws will be one that is just kind of suggestive, and it really does just fill you with this sense of unease to look at
Hmm.
this image. It's
Right,
really
right.
cool. Okay, the way this book is organized, um, it is. I think it would be really exciting for somebody who didn't live in the Rio Grande Valley, but it must be really exciting for somebody who does. It's organized into the counties of the Rio Grande
Right, the
Valley.
four
So
counties
could you
of the Rio Grande Valley.
yeah, could you give me like I don't know, just give me your elevator pitch on what is the Rio Grande Valley, which I know you call home, and what made you want to tell the stories of the ghosts that are found there?
Sure. So the Rio Grande Valley is this four-county region at the very tip of Texas, that edges the Rio Grande Valley and the Gulf of Mexico. And so you've got Cameron and Willacy at the far eastern edge that are one atop the other, that are there on the Gulf. And then further inland, you've got Hidalgo, which is probably the biggest and most populous of the counties, followed by Star, which is probably the most sparsely populated. And the four county area is almost kind of like a large metropolis in a way. There are about a million or so inhabitants, and especially in the mid valley, that Hidalgo area that stretches along the river, all the cities have begun to blend together into like just one area. And for the longest time, this was just a ranching area. Most of the 19th century, people simply lived in ranches and worked in farming, stuff like that. But at the beginning of the 20th century, you had this huge influx of Anglo-American settlers who were coming because of major changes in irrigation technology, and they established towns, a lot of towns there in the Mid Valley area, and it kind of transformed into like an agricultural paradise. And this is where the idea of the valley was born, because before that it wasn't called the valley, because it's not a valley, Jason. We call it a valley. It is clearly not a valley. It is a coastal plain that is, edges into desert in certain places, and we in the middle of it we have all these oxbow lakes, which are called resacas in Spanish, that are surrounded by lush but thorny vegetation. Thorn forests is what they're called. And when you grow up in this area, because of the rich and very layered history, you learn of all these fantastical things, both historical and legendary, that have occurred here over the course of 3 or 4 centuries. And one of the main staples of local lore are haunted places, ghost stories, and many of them having roots in that transition period from the Mexican American dominance to Anglo American dominance. And there was a lot of upheaval and mistreatment, marginalization of Mexican Americans, even though they were the majority and for the longest time had controlled this area. And as a result, there were a lot of tragedies that befell the population that gave rise to these stories of hauntings and so forth. And so the idea in the book was, when the History Press approached me after Border Lore came out and asked me, would you do a book with us? I told them yes, but because I have this Haunted America series that they wanted me to write for. And I said, that's fine, but when I think of ghosts, I don't just think of like the revenants, the souls of people that linger in a place because of whatever tragic death they've had. I think of the scars on our collective consciousness, our collective memory, that we kind of try to hide, we bandage over. They're often dismissed and ignored by, say, history classes, history curricula in the state of Texas, but that are there nonetheless, and that need to be, I think, exposed to the light of day. And it's healthier to look at these things. So I told them I want to tell 17 ghost stories, but I want to center them on the actual historical events that gave rise to those, so that if I'm talking about the ghostly nun at La Lomita Chapel and Mission, I talk about how Mission was established, why La Lomita Chapel was built, what sorts of things happened in socio-historical terms to give rise to the tensions that would create a legend like that about a nun.
So, is it your theory that I apologize, David.
No, go ahead, Dave. Jump in. That's great.
Well, is it your theory that ghost stories, in a sense, are a way of recording injustices that have happened in the past? And
I think so. Recording injustices, grappling with them, seeking justice for them, seeking like revenge a lot of times. Case in point, the San Juan Hotel, the story that I tell about the very famous and very hated Thomas Shannon, Whispering Tom Mayfield, who was a member of the sheriff's posse, and then had commissioned as Texas Ranger and became a deputy constable later in life, but was a very feared figure in the Mexican American community because of how many Mexican Americans he lynched when the Mexican Revolution kind of spilled over the border in around 1915 in what are called the Bandit Wars, where you had revolutionaries crossing the border to steal things and try to gather munitions and supplies, things like that, by stealing them, and then cross back into Mexico. And the U.S. federal government federalized like 100,000 National Guardsmen from different states and sent them to the valley, and the tensions were really high. And it's estimated that more than 1,000 Mexican Americans were lynched on the spot, even though they may have had absolutely nothing to do with what was going on. And so this guy, he spent his final years after retirement there in that hotel, living in a room. And when he eventually died, legend has it among the people of San Juan and Alamo and so forth, that his soul was condemned to be tortured for all eternity by the spirits of people he had lynched there in the guts of the hotel, which is boarded up and abandoned at this point.
It's amazing, because that means that in a sense, you can kind of see how it works, especially it's almost folkloric, like somebody wanders
Hmm.
by, oh, I hear there's a legend about that place, there's a ghost. Oh, what's that ghost about? Well, the ghost is upset about this. Now let me tell you about this thing that happened.
Right.
Throughout this book, you've got it arranged according to the counties. Well, one thing I thought really interesting was, and I'm going to get into how you organize each chapter because it's fascinating to me, but the Texas Rangers, the existence of the Texas Rangers is this thing, this concept that pops up over and over again, as
Hmm.
both a source of, law enforcement, but also just fear,
Yeah.
and disruption. You tell this wonderful story, and you'll have to tell me if it's fictional or based on history of this girl, and she's in love with a wealthy boy from Houston who is a Texas Ranger, but he's decided to be a Texas Ranger, but of course now there's all this racial strife going on,
Right.
and
Right.
yeah, and that leads to what inevitably becomes a ghost story about her.
Right. Right. So
Um,
it's the local Llorona story from the town of San Benito, and so this is kind of a great way for me to explain so how I put the book together so that I
yeah,
can like lead into that particular story. So um, once I had signed on the dotted line and the contract was in place, I sat down and decided what stories I wanted to do. They had a certain length that they wanted, and so I tried to shoot for about 16, 17 stories that I could spend about 10 pages on each. And I wrote down those hauntings as I remembered them from hearing them growing up and things that my grandmother Gatsa told me, my friends and my wife and so forth. And wrote down like quick little sketches, a paragraph or two. And then I started digging in. I started following two different lines of investigation, digging into the history itself of
yeah,
each of those places, trying to find as much, as much primary source documentation as I could. And then also talking to people, putting out on social media a call for, information about things, and going into communities when I could. And so I had grown up hearing about the Wailing Woman or Llorona of San
hmm
Benito, because there is an oxbow lake of Resaca called Los Fresnos, which is ironically not in the town of Los Fresnos, but anyway, this is the valley for you. And
sure,
so, in looking into it, I talked to some people, and basically they were the same sort of version: a woman who drowns her children and then drowns herself, and now she
hmm
wanders. And I would get different things like, oh yeah, well she was a washerwoman and she fell in love with somebody that was above her station and this other thing. And things fell into place for me because I was doing a lot of historical research and found out about all the Texas Rangers and other National Guardsmen that were stationed in San Benito. It was a very large force because of how close the town
hmm
is to Brownsville, where a lot of problems were going on. But it wasn't until I went into San Benito and started like looking for like older people because I couldn't go around knocking on doors. I would went to go public places, and you've been down here enough. I mean, you lived in Texas, and this is common in a lot of places. And in front of HEBs, which for people who don't know are kind of like our major chain of grocery
grocery
stores in
stores, yeah,
Texas. Um, in front of HEBs in the Rio Grande Valley, there are benches, and often on these benches you will find three or four old men sitting talking, and they will talk to each other for hours, and they just seem to be having a lot of fun chatting with each other about the past and making fun of people as they pass. And so I sidled up to a group of these men, and I just asked a gentleman that was there. I asked him in Spanish, "Oiga, usted sabe sobre la Llorona de la Resaca?" And he started going, "Oh yes, I know about the Wailing Woman." And he just went off, and he started telling me, and this is what, like, he didn't give me all the details that I include in the story because of course as a writer of fiction, when I retell a folktale, I retell it as if it were, a
sure,
short story. But what he did tell me was this woman married a Texas Ranger, and the Texas Ranger was responsible for the death of her brother, and that's what drove her mad. And I was like, oh snap, that is perfect. That is an incredible take on the story,
yeah.
especially in a very fortuitous bit of information based on the things that I've been researching. So then from there, it was kind of like, putting it together, looking at the Texas Rangers that were there, trying to figure out what kind of man he would have been, and
hmm
creating a fictional person and embedding him in like an actual real troop of Texas Rangers and using the activities of that troop of Texas Rangers to inform what he might have done and what he might have been involved in, because there were a group of 10 Mexican Americans close to San Benito that were executed by Texas Rangers and a sheriff's posse after a train had been derailed nearby, and it seemed to fit the story perfectly. So it's this mingling of legend and history and speculation on my part that creates, I think, a unique retelling of this haunting that's been.
I think it's a
told
lovely
for.
retelling. I mean, I know there are many stories in here, but what I really loved about this is that, it plays like a romance. So if it were any other kind of story, you kind of feel like these characters are gonna figure it out. They're gonna pull this.
Yeah,
They're gonna pull out of this horrible dive that they're in. But because it's a ghost story, that's not what happens at all. Instead, it's a tragedy, and then tragedy leaves its mark. You have another story in here where you said that somehow ghosts are really just a capturing of powerful things that have happened in the past. Is that right? That I'm trying
yeah,
I'm trying
yeah. I
to
mean,
go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say there are some purported hauntings that really feel more like as if there were some kind of psychic mark left on the landscape, and
Yeah.
sometimes not even a negative one. So when you talk about Sherry Mansion out in Sherryland and how the ghost of John Sherry and his wife are purportedly seen, wandering through the grapefruit orchards and rocking on a rocker on the front porch, or
Mm-hmm.
dancing above the lake behind the mansion. I mean, their relationship with the land and with each other is a really kind of like a beautiful and pure thing.
Mm-hmm.
That and when you hear a story about their ghost lingering, it's not about tragedy. It's about like deep attachment to the land, and the fact that John Sherry, as like the grandfather of the citrus industry in the Rio Grande Valley, I mean, he really reshaped this land in a positive, creative, beautiful way, and wasn't just here to develop,
Yeah.
haphazardly, but spent. And they didn't have children. They adopted, I believe, his wife's niece, and she went on to marry the governor of Texas, or a man who would become the governor of Texas,
No kidding.
Governor. Yeah, Governor was Shivers. I can't remember his last name right now, but
And
yeah.
in
So
each chapter, it's for the listener, if you're wondering,
mhm,
it half of it reads like a textbook. In other words, each chapter you go, okay, here's the historical data, here's the story
yeah,
historically, the history book piece of it, and that goes on for like a page or so, or a couple pages, and then you go,
right,
now here's a legend, and then you'll do essentially a short story, a short piece of
right,
fiction. And
right,
and then you go, okay, that's done. Now you move to the next little town. You give the historical data, so you can learn so much about this really rich and I think underexplored part of
yeah, sure,
Texas, part of America, I should say. And
yeah.
then and then you've got also all of these short stories. It seems very ambitious to have done, and yet and so how long did it take you to do these 17?
All right, so it took me about 6 months to do all the research that I needed to do, and like work out how I wanted things to be put together, and write that first draft. And then there was another month of revising and editing and wrangling, and so all told, I would say it was probably about 7 months of work. And it was very, very enjoyable. Of course, we're also talking about something that's been like a lifelong fascination of mine, and
Sure.
so it's not like coming into a region that you know nothing about, and where you'd have to spend probably years doing it. Here, I'm I'm drawing from my own experience, my own previous knowledge, and things like that. I'm in a place that, as you well know, I love very, very dearly,
Oh
and I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
and I've spent the majority of my life here.
You've got
So yeah,
some
I mean,
Go ahead. No, please.
no, I was just going to say, so the way you've laid it out is exactly right. So the idea, of course, is people come to this book because of their fascination with ghosts, but I give them the history as well, because I think that the two things are kind of inextricably bound up in each other.
Yeah.
And I also want I've always been a big fan on ever since I was a teacher for 14 years in classes full of struggling readers, reluctant readers, and you hook them with the scares and the ghoulishness, and then once they're hooked, then you give them like this meatier stuff that you want them to come away with, and that's what I tried to do. And I mean, the book has been really, really successful in this region. People have responded to it so well. And the History Press like put it in every freaking place I could. So you go into Walgreens and there it is. You go into Costco and there's the book staring at you. You go everywhere you go. There's and it it really, really did well. It was sold out of its first print run, and they did a second print run. And so I mean, it was very satisfying to see how people responded to it and have people want to hear more about this region that matters so much to them, and they know that our children are growing up without understanding the history of it. Like this region didn't just spring, holy form from the forehead of Zeus or something like that, and it wasn't it wasn't forged by people holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It would cost blood and tears and a lot of marginalization from the defeat of the Cuauhtecan Indians here by the Spaniards to its to the independence from Spain and its conversion into Mexico, and all the people who had land grants from the Spanish king having to like struggle to hold on to those lands, and the slow and steady progress of Catholicism through the oblate priest who would do the rounds of all the ranches in the 1800s to the arrival of the Anglo-Americans, the Mexican War, all those kinds of things, stratum upon stratum upon stratum of very intense and densely storied moments in history that people don't know anything about and that are not taught in school, certainly not part of the state curriculum. You don't see anything in the TEKS about these kinds of things. And students, when they learn Texas history, if they get just a day of conversation about the Rio Grande Valley, then they're lucky. And it's something that is a shame, and that I'd like to, in any way that I possibly can, change a little bit. So,
can you tell me a little bit about? Well, I know that to that end, I'm not sure if it's related, but I know that you've been working on something in television recently, and
sure.
So, is that related to this, or is it a different project?
Well, it's a different project from Ghost of Rio Grande Valley, but if you remember, last summer my book Border Lore came out, and Border Lore dealt with some of the same sorts of things, but more the more lurid, monstrous legends of demons and lechuzas and all this other crazy stuff. And I have been for the past 9 months or so developing a TV series version of that book with a couple of production companies from Hollywood that are run by Latinos and that seek to put out Latino-themed entertainment movies and TV series, and they've done some things with Netflix and so forth. And so Mucho Más Media and El Campanario, and we've been working together, and things are like really, really ramping up. The series hasn't been greenlit yet. It hasn't been, like picked up by a network yet, although we've and we're in the midst of some negotiations that are looking really, really good. And if everything goes as it appears that it will, the series will probably start filming in the spring. So maybe by the end of 2017 or the beginning of 2018, there will be a Border Lore TV series somewhere out there, on some network or some other type of streaming service. So, and
do you anticipate it as like what kind of? So I know that you're just sort of designing that whole idea right now, but do you picture it having fictional with characters, or is this a nonfiction series?
No. It's fictional. So the elevator pitch is Latino Tales from the Crypt. That's the elevator pitch.
Oh
so
my God, that's awesome. Well, then you can just lift stuff from this book too. I mean, Border Lore just becomes the brand, and you could totally
you could pull from all sorts of things. Although, if anybody from the History Press is listening, not specifically from that book, without getting the film rights for it, but I mean,
I own the
I own the rights I own the film rights to Bordelore, but not to the History Press, not to the Ghost of Rio Grande Valley. But yeah, so
That's
the idea
awesome.
it's 30-minute episodes. It's a horror anthology series of the sort that you and I really really love,
Hmm.
with perhaps a more millennial kind of palette and tonality. So maybe something a little more in line with things that are currently on TV, like American Horror Story or The
Uh-huh.
Exorcist, or those series that are on right now. A little more intense, a little more horrific, perhaps than say like the Twilight Zone or something like that. But it
Well, to me, what
definitely,
strings those series together more than anything else is that there's a tendency to have a recurring story. So even if you were even if it were an anthology and you had different major stories each episode, what what would make it more like those would be some recurring theme that keeps you
yeah.
going.
And so the
Yeah.
interesting thing about this series is that it's kind of a blend of the two. So you have standalone episodes, and then you have, it's almost kind of like the X Files. You have mythology episodes. So there is a through line in the series that connects certain stories, and there are certain recurring characters. Um, and those mythology episodes, like every third episode or so, will be interconnected, and so it really rewards this, sticking with it and unpacking those mythology episodes, so that by the end of several seasons, you will see a bigger picture, that's a larger story that's being told, in addition to the creepy standalone episodes. And in a way, all of it is happening within like the same universe, but not all the stories have to do with these recurring characters. And the idea is to weave kind of like a tapestry, moving back and forth in time and so forth, to tell the story of a particular character and the issues that character has, along with these standalone episodes. So it's a hybrid of a Tales from the Crypt kind of like standalone series, and
Love it.
a more modern anthology series like American Horror
Man,
Story.
I'm well, I want to keep hearing about this because that and and I want people to read both of these books because I did read Border Lore and it single-handedly you're going to be making people aware that this really amazing and rich and heavily populated part of the United States that somehow people are just not aware of.
Yeah.
It's going to come into people's consciousness, and I think that's fabulous.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I'm really looking forward to, to me it feels like an honor to be taking these stories to a national slash international stage, and trying to curate them well, and create stories that will not only be exciting for Latinos, especially Mexican Americans, to see, but that will be relevant and compelling and exciting for people of other ethnicities to watch as well, and to enjoy, and get a feel for the sorts of devastatingly frightening stories that can be told from the Mexican American perspective.
Fabulous. Okay, so I want to switch gears really quickly because
Awesome.
you also, at the same time that this nonfiction, although it does have a lot of fiction in it, it has 17
Yeah.
stories. That's a hell of a lot of fiction.
Yeah.
But at the same time as that, you also have a new novel that is, I think, the strangest thing I've ever heard of, which is Lords of the Earth. It is
Leave
a
it to me.
kaiju novel. Kaiju
Right.
novel with a We don't say Latino anymore, do we? So how do you say this new word that people are using?
Oh, Latinx.
Is it Latinx?
Latinx.
Okay, it's a
Yeah.
Latinx kaiju novel. So
Yeah.
explain to me what the heck that is about.
Sure. So, I mean, I grew up like a lot of people, Drew Edwards and you and a bunch of other people are like, have the same experience watching these, kaiju movies from Japan, and then really enjoying as America kind of jumped on the
You
bandwagon.
even speak
They,
Japanese, last I checked, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. I mean, I studied it because of how enthused I was. You grow up, with those kinds of things, and you get really excited about the culture, and you want to study more.
mhm.
And and I've been delighted to see what people like Guillermo del Toro have done, bringing into Hollywood as well, and updating the concept for I guess our palettes. But one of the things that I always found a little disappointing is that it's always Tokyo or Los Angeles or New York that's getting devastated. And I would think to myself, why not Mexico City? Why not friggin' Monterrey? Why not Acapulco? Or why would the monsters always gravitate to Japan and America? There are all these other nations in the world that seem ripe for destruction. And so this idea always kind of floated in the back of my head, and doing a lot of research for a book that's coming out next year, Mexican Mythology from Cinco Puntos Press, I began to realize that there were a lot of giant lizard stories in Mexican mythology. And I was like, wow,
cool.
This is like really, really ripe for somebody to play around with it in a kaiju kind of way. Then Severed Press, which is an indie press that puts out kaiju novels and vampire novels and post-apocalyptic novels, and they have like this little niche in the horror market for that kind of stuff, put out a call for some interesting kaiju novels that kind of twist the concept around. And so I pitched the idea of Lords of the Earth, which is that volcanoes begin to erupt in Mexico, and they expel these like massive like stone pods, and the pods break open, and these behemoths emerge and start like just smashing shit left and right. And the Mexican government military is scrambling, like in every kaiju movie you've ever seen, to do something about it, but they are ineffectual. And so the Mexican government has to bring in the science team, and I have it headed by a physicist named Elena Bass. And Elena Bass is she is a disabled woman. She has like a prosthetic arm, and she's got a major chip on her shoulder in addition to that. And she finds herself having to work with her longtime rival, who is this indigenous anthropologist named Alfonso Becerra, who's convinced that the only way you can the only way that Mexico is going to be able to answer the threat of these creatures is by diving into the mythology and literature of the ancient peoples of Mexico and looking for a response there. And he has like evidence that these things have emerged before, or that other ones have emerged, and that they've been dealt with by these people. And she scoffs at the idea, but one thing leads to another, and all of the things that she tries to do to stop the creature just don't work, and they end up having to work together. So without spoiling it too much, they have to get past their rivalry, and so I'm able to throw in a lot of interesting political commentary, because the book is supposed to be set. It never says it, but it's clearly set like next year after the American elections, and as these creatures like begin to make their way towards the northern part of Mexico, the U.S. government begins to step in and say, you guys, you need to do something, or we're gonna like bomb the shit out of these things. We're gonna drop nuclear weapons on Mexican soil if you cannot stop them, because we're not going to allow them to get within a certain radius of the border. And so there's all these political tensions, and there are all these references to hate against Mexico that emerges from the election. And I was kind of, when I was writing it, I was like kind of hoping that Clinton would win, but also feeling that maybe Trump would. And so I built in this ambiguity about who the president is, but I definitely make it clear that whoever it is not on Mexico's side in this. And so there's also there's a race against time because of the disruption, and also because America is going to use nuclear weapons to stop them if they have to. And so
that's good thinking. That's really great thinking. No, and I'm excited. And it's getting good reviews. I was looking at it on Amazon, and people are really enjoying it.
One of the things is when you have the misfortune, and I'm really trying to do something about this, but you know how prolific I am, and how when you're trying to carve a niche for yourself out there, and you're trying to get your work into people's hands, sometimes you'll do all these projects and you'll send them off, and in the hopes that one of them will get picked up and make it, and then suddenly you'll have like 2 or 3 of them get picked up at the same time and are being published within a very short period of each other, and you're like, snap, that's going to be really tough to because I'm focusing on one, and the other one comes out, and I'm in the midst of promoting the other one. So I'm really only beginning now to start pushing Lords of the Earth and promoting it, whatever. And
But what's
um,
exciting is this is something that definitely lends itself to multimedia. I mean, I think I could definitely see Mexican kaiju comic books and oh man, wouldn't that be great to like go
yeah,
into to your local. I mean, around here, if you want Mexican uh uh pastries and everything, there's like wholly separate grocery stores in Denver, okay? So it's like
yeah.
and but I mean that's where you would find the Spanish language comic books and all that.
Yeah,
So
that would be super cool.
oh, it's a
And
wonderful idea.
and speaking of comics, I mean, I just signed a contract for a graphic novel that's going to be coming out in 2018. Speaking of Mexican themed comic books, and so I'm really excited about that. And it's kind of up your alley because it's steampunk. So it's
Hmm.
a young adult steampunk fantasy graphic novel set in 1865 in this alternate South Texas Tamaulipas thing called the Republic of Santander. Very steampunky, with steam-driven automatons and zeppelins and all that kind of stuff. And it's a really, really exciting project. The publisher is still they're holding off to make the announcement about it until they get an illustrator lined up, because we've been really looking for a Latino comic book artist who can jump on the
Sure.
project and do a really good job of it. So, but that looks like it's we're finalizing our negotiations with someone. So hopefully pretty soon there will be an announcement in the trades about that. That'll be cool. So we
Fabulous.
just
No,
got
I can't wait.
trying to do Rio Grande Valley Mexican American theme stuff in as many genres and as many um, different platforms as I possibly can, because there's just so much good stuff and not enough of it's getting out there, and I want to put a wedge in the door for people who are coming alongside and after me to have these voices heard and these stories told, and just
That's
it's
fabulous.
anything I can do. And so some people are like, oh my God, you're so shouldn't you slow down and be less prolific? And I'm like, uh, we got to take advantage of every opportunity we have. And so if the door opens a crack, I'm gonna like throw my shoulder against that door and try to open it wider for more people. But now I'm full time as a tenure track professor at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley.
I was thinking, you said you want to drive young writers to continue moving down this path. I mean, do you have an opportunity to influence any students around you who want to get into writing, get into this sort of work?
Well, I certainly think I do. I mean, I primarily teach courses in children's and adolescent literature and how to teach those things. And so I mean, most of the classes I teach are in what's called the English Education Program. I'm in the Literature and Cultural Studies department, but there's this program that's for English majors who then want to go on to be teachers. And so a lot of the work that I do is exposing them to diverse children's literature, middle grade and young adult literature, um, teach them about ways to be culturally responsive and responsible as teachers, how to reach struggling Latino readers in their classrooms and things like that. But I also work closely with the Mexican American Studies program and the Creative Writing program. And there's a creative writing club as well. And so as much as possible, I am trying to influence would-be writers and doing what I can. And I've done a little bit of publishing work down here with a small press that's now called Flower Song Books, and just every opportunity I can to give people a foot in the door or some exposure, point them in the right direction, give them advice. I do, because I think it's really important that more and more Mexican American writers from the Valley take on, because we've got a lot of poets on here, and I don't mean to talk smack about my poet friends,
Hmm.
but we need we need fiction writers. We need people who are writing books for our children, who are writing novels for the adults in the community. We need that sort of thing, and so in order for that to happen, people have to feel they need to feel more confident in their chances, because you know how tough it is. You've been doing this for a couple of decades now, and it's,
Yeah.
you have your up years, you have your down years, and you
Yeah.
can, be riding high for a while and then suddenly be like looking around you like, oh shit, what happened? What do I do now?
Yeah.
And that's scary for people. And anything that I can do to try to calm their fears and guide them through that whole, sargasso of the publishing world, then I'm happy to do it.
Outstanding. Wow. Well, David, okay, so the new books are The Ghosts of the Rio Grande Valley by you, David Bowles, and illustrations from Jose Melendez. Likewise, Lords of the Earth is a brand new kaiju novel about
With
giant
the cover
lizards
by,
attacking. Hmm?
I was just going to say, and that cover illustration is also done by Jose Melendez, the guy who did
Jose
Ghost of the Rio
Melendez,
Grande
no
Valley.
kidding. Okay,
Yeah.
I had completely forgotten that. Yeah, and that's giant lizards attacking Mexico. So
Yeah.
so this is fabulous. A lot of good work to talk about, and I'm really glad that you were able to come on. And I'm going to see you in gosh, like 2 weeks or
Yeah,
less.
December 3rd. That's right. It's gonna be awesome. So I look
There's a
forward to it.
lot of writers.
But it's going to be really awesome. And I know, there's going to be all kinds of people in there: Guadalupe Garcia McCall, Javier Garza, all these people that haven't seen you in a long ass time. We're going to be very happy and give you lots of hugs. So get ready for it.
Is the Border Book Bash celebrating teens and
Border book.
tweens of the Rio Grande Valley, 20 different authors. It'll be Saturday, December 3rd, 9 a.m. to 4:30 in the afternoon. That's Saturday, December 3rd, Alton Memorial Junior High School in Alton, Texas.
Right,
So,
right, just north of Mission. Well, I look
yeah.
forward to seeing you there, and thank you so much for inviting me back on the show. You guys keep up the good work, and I'll keep listening.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. So long.
All right.